I recently got my hands on a copy of the 20th anniversary edition of Shadowrun, a revision of the 4th edition. In the 5th edition days, I was often told that the earlier editions were better, so I decided I'd work my way backwards. Because you know those memes about Greek, Norse, and other mythological beings that go something like, "Unfortunately, Loki got bored"? Mine would be, "Unfortunately, Aaron needed answers." I want to know how we got to where we are today, and so, let's start this journey by looking into the basics and character creation of Shadowrun 4th edition. Shadowrun 20th Anniversary Edition is a revision of Shadowrun 4th Edition, and thus makes a few references to things found in other 4th Edition sourcebooks. So if you feel something is lacking in this core book, it immediately points you in the right direction for where you should look next. Which, this book already weighs in at close to 400 pages. Most of it is lists, but there's still a lot of things you're gonna need to be familiar with. So, let's get the ball rolling. First things first, you're going to need some regular old 6-sided dice. More is better. I'm talking raiding the Monopoly boxes ain't gonna cut it amounts of dice. Unless you're one of those people who genuinely collects different editions of Monopoly. But even that may not be enough. Jokes aside, Shadowrun uses D6s, and it uses a lot, and you'll probably want about 12 per player. For all rolls, you'll be forming a dice pool by gathering up a certain number of dice, most often the rating of one of your attributes, and adding it to the rating of one of your skills, and maybe adding a little bit more or taking some away depending on various situational modifiers. You will then roll all of those dice and count up any of them that come up as 5 or 6. Those 5s and 6s are what are called hits, and they measure how well you accomplish the task at hand, if at all. Usually, one hit is enough to pass a test. Sometimes you may be required to get more. The number of hits you need to get is called the threshold. Worth noting though, if you fail a test, you still have the option of trying again, though at a -2 dice penalty. The only way to eliminate that penalty is by either waiting a sufficient amount of time to try again, or otherwise finding some way to change the situation, like getting better tools. You also make a note of how many 1s that you have whenever you roll. If at least half the results are 1, you get what is called a glitch. Glitches are when life gets interesting. It won't negate your success, but something happens that could cause trouble down the line. Something like a part of your clothing ripping while you're performing a physical task. However, if you glitch and have no hits, that is a critical glitch, and that is where things get really bad. This is something like your cyber arms malfunction and suddenly you have no use of those limbs until you can get them fixed up. Some other permutations of the basic roll include the opposed roll. This is simply when two characters form their respective dice pools, and whoever gets more hits gets their way. And as you may expect, this is most typically used in combat. Then there is the extended test, which is a roll that's used to represent working towards a larger end, such as making modifications to a machine. You gather your dice pool and roll as normal, though each roll you make represents your character working on the task for a certain amount of time. It doesn't represent if you can do the thing, so much as how quickly you can do it, since unless you're some kind of god at the task at hand, you'll typically need more than one roll to acquire enough hits to complete what you're trying to do. Glitches work a little differently in extended tests. A normal glitch will reduce the amount of hits you acquired by 1d6. Meanwhile, a critical glitch automatically fails. Start over from the beginning. Then, there is also the teamwork test. This is when multiple people work together to accomplish a common task, such as casting a spell as a ritual. You start this by having everybody gather their dice pool and pick one person to be the leader. Everybody who is not the leader then rolls their dice and counts up their hits. Every hit earned this way is then added to the leader's dice pool. The amount of extra hits that can be gained this way are capped at the leader's skill rating. The amount of extra dice that can be gained this way are capped at the leader's skill rating. The leader is thus the last one to roll. only the leader's hits determine if the task is successful or not. So while there's room for a massive payoff, probability can always tell you off and give you nowhere near the amount of hits you needed. But if all that was a bit much, here's the most important bits to remember. In Shadowrun, you add an attribute to a skill and roll that many dice. You're looking for 5s and 6s. All other rolls are permutations of that basic process. With that said, let's talk character creation. Character creation in Shadowrun 4th edition starts on page 80 in the 20th anniversary edition. Characters are made using build points to give them various skills, attributes, and qualities. You get 400 build points, and everything about your character has a cost in build points. Given the open-ended nature of how characters are made in Shadowrun 4th edition, you have a lot of freedom to make your character as you see fit. The drawback, though, is that you can easily make your character way less effective than you would expect them to be. With that said, if you require some kind of guidance, a good place to look is on page 98, where you'll find several pre-made characters. It's also good to know the importance of all the different things you can buy with build points. There is no specific order of steps you need to follow, but the rulebook does have an order they recommend. Metatype, qualities, attributes, skills, resources, and finishing touches. And that's the order we're going to review these concepts in. If you all remember the big hubbub the internet made in 2021 about Goblinization Day, Shadowrun is where that idea comes from. All the things like elf, dwarf, orc, troll, those are different metatypes. Along with humans, those 5 make up what is known as meta-humanity. And since Shadowrun takes place in an alternate timeline of our own world, this means you can very easily have things like elves that come from Africa or orcs that come from China. Your character's metatype determines what your maximum attributes are, with human being the default metatype. And of course, different metatypes have different build point costs, since from a gameplay perspective, many of the metatypes are simply better than humans. Humans start with 1 in every attribute, while a troll would start with 5 in both strength and body and can max out either of them at 10. And on top of that, trolls have a natural armor, and their size gives them a naturally longer reach. But this costs 40 build points for your character if you want them to be a troll, and your character then has to deal with living in a world simply not meant for somebody that's 9 feet tall and 5 feet wide. Qualities are innate, qualities that your character has, for good or ill. They're little quirks that give you an edge, or blunt it. Positive qualities can range from having an even higher maximum than is normal in a certain attribute, being really good at a particular kind of activity, or some other special advantage. If you want your character to be an adept, magician, mystic adept, or technomancer, and you'll need to take those qualities. Negative qualities include having some kind of drawback, like not being able to do certain actions as well. Positive qualities cost build points, while negative qualities will give them back to you. Worth noting is that you cannot have any more than 35 BP worth of positive qualities, nor can you get back more than 35 from negative qualities. And there is a summary of what qualities are available on pages 81 and 82. Attributes are the raw ability of your character. They affect almost everything your character will do in one way or another. More specifically, almost every dice pool you form will include one of your attributes, though in a few cases, you'll use 2. The attributes can be broken into 3 groups: physical, mental, and special. The physical attributes are agility, which is your motor control, body, which is how tough you are and how much endurance you have, strength, your physical might, and reaction is your reflexes and your ability to react to things. Your mental attributes are charisma, which is your ability of dealing with people, intuition, which is how quickly you can think, logic, which is your ability to learn, remember, and process information, and willpower, which is your self-control. The special attributes are edge, which is that je ne sais quoi, something special that lets you succeed against all odds. And essence is special in that it affects what your maximum magic rating is and how much cybernetic parts you can have put on. And magic is, your ability to use magic. This is only available to mages, adepts, and mystic adepts. And last is resonance, which is magic, but for technomancers. Edge is special in that it represents how many of the creatively named edge points you have every session, which can be spent for various effects listed on page 74. All attributes cost 10 build points, unless you're buying the point that brings you to your natural maximum. Then it's 25 build points. This means that for a human to reach 6 in, say, body, they would need to spend 65 build points. Their first point is free. The 4 leading up to 5 cost 10 build points each, for 40, and number 6 would cost 25. Also worth noting is that only half of your build points can be spent on attributes. So if you don't know where to start, consider getting 200 build points worth of attributes. There's also a few other attributes that are derived from your base attributes. Initiative, which is your reaction plus your intuition. This determines when you can act in combat. And then there are your condition monitors, which are how much damage you can take before you're knocked out in the case of stun, or dead in the case of physical. Stun is half of your will plus 8, and physical is half of your body plus 8. Here is a few other things to keep in mind about attributes. Only one of them is allowed to start off at their max rating, which for humans would be 6. Everything else can go up to being just 1 short of your maximum. Also, the maximum an attribute can be modified by, be it through magic or cyberware, is 50% of its base. This means if you have 6 body, you can only get plus 3 through enhancements. And last, the human average for all attributes is 3. So if you're unsure what to rate them, 3 is a nice safe bet. After all, that'll guarantee you have at least 3 dice on any test that calls for that attribute, and you'll be able to enhance it through magic or technology by at least 1. If attributes are your innate raw abilities of your character, skills are the things that they've learned to do. The specific section for this starts on page 121 and goes on to page 129. Skills are divided into 3 categories: active, knowledge, and language. Active skills make up the bulk of the skills section, and they are arguably the most important. They're the things your character can actually do. They also have the most things to know about them. All active skills can be acquired individually, but there is a discount you get for buying them as part of what's known as a skill group, a set of related skills that are treated as one skill. There's a few important caveats to skill groups though. First, if you're improving a skill group, you must raise all of the skills in that group. You're not allowed to break them up. Second, you're not allowed to get any specializations in a skill group. And third, some skills are simply not a part of a skill group. Archery is one such example. There's not a whole lot of other things that knowing how to use a bow will help you with. While going for a skill group usually gives you 3 skills linked together at a discount, sometimes you might only want one of those skills and you know you will never use the others. Ergo, while you can still buy them individually, this also allows you to gain specializations in them. A specialization is a narrower focus of a given skill. You know a lot about using pistols, but revolvers happen to be what you're best at. Gaining a specialization, like anything else, costs build points. But your specialization grants you an additional plus 2 dice when the situation at hand meets your specialization. And on the subject of numbers, the highest a skill can normally go is 6. Skill softs are a special kind of cyberware that can raise your skills by 50% of their base value, meaning that a skill rated at 6 can be boosted as high as 9 this way. At character creation, you can only have 1 skill rated at 6, or 2 rated at 5. Everything else, including skill groups, cannot go any higher than 4. We would be here all day if I covered every possible facet of every skill. So just keep in mind that page 120 is a fairly comprehensive list of all the skills, and following that is various important write-ups of what they're likely to be used for, what skill groups they belong to, and if they can default. Knowledge and language skills are a little bit special, and that you don't need to pay BP to get them at character creation, but you may spend BP to get more than you would normally start with. You start with 3 times your logic and intuition for points and knowledge skills, and you may also buy up to that much at character creation using your build points, effectively letting you double your knowledge and language skills. Knowledge skills are more open-ended, and they cover the various things your character would know about, but not necessarily be able to do things with. They fall into 4 categories: street, academic, professional, and interest. Very few of them are directly useful and are better served at illustrating what things are rattling around in your character's head when they're not working. What are they likely to talk about when they're not talking shop? And, speaking of talking with people, language skills. Language skills limit your character's charisma-based skills when you're not using your native language. Let's say you have English as your native language and French rated at 2. This means you will only ever get 2 dice from your charisma if you need to speak French. As a note for Game Masters, there's a lot of specific rules regarding skills and subsystems in Shadowrun. This is true of every edition I've read so far, but as a general rule, the situation the player is in, including having the right tools, can add to dice pools, with the reverse being true for taking away dice as well. Preparation is vital and can give you an edge if you know what's coming up and have the tools to handle it. And GMs, you can fairly easily make an idea for a session or heist go on for a lot longer if you have the player characters act out gathering information about a mark, or getting the tools and resources needed to otherwise gain access to places and things they otherwise have no business being in. And, speaking of resources refers not necessarily to money, but equipment and living conditions. There's a long list starting on page 310 of most items available, and it goes on to the end of the book. And any equipment you start with is going to cost you build points. Sort of. It's more like every build point you spend gets you 5,000 new yen to buy gear with. And you can't spend any more than 50 build points this way, capping you out at a maximum of 250,000 new yen. Most gear has a rating, which is a measure of how good it is at what it was designed for, and more often than not, is the dice pool that it would add to a given roll when it would be used. None of your starting gear can have a rating higher than 6. Also, you're not allowed to start with any gear higher than availability 12. Availability being a measure of how difficult it is to find the item, legitimately or otherwise. Cyberware, that is, replacing your squishy bits with metal ones, is another piece of gear you can get. But keep in mind, getting this will also lower your character's essence. This is not really important if you're not playing as a mage or a technomancer, but it's still a very worthwhile consideration. Shadowrun is, for better or worse, not a game where you can have it all. 2 other things worth considering are your character's contacts, the people they know and can get information or other favors from, and their lifestyle. Lifestyle is, simply put, month-to-month expenses. Because worrying about how we afford living is so much fun, we want to do it in a game too, right? It's paid for in monthly intervals and determines how much new yen you'll start the game with when the game begins. This means all the new yen you're paying for with your build points, it doesn't carry over. Last, your contacts are not necessarily equipment, but they're still an important thing for your character to have. They're rated based on loyalty, which is how willing they are to help you, and their connection, which is what they can actually do for you. You don't spend new yen for contacts, only your build points, and it does not count for the 50 you can spend towards equipment. Though if your character is more a social type that does all sorts of wheeling and dealing, go ahead and spend more on contacts for that character. And last, we get to the finishing touches. And while it's fine and dandy to have a bunch of numbers on a sheet, keep in mind that those numbers represent somebody. Some suggestions for that final spark of life: write down a few quotes for them, things that they're likely to say given circumstances they frequently find themselves in. Or write a paragraph of what somebody else would describe them as. Or write an outline of how they got their skills and everything. The hows and whys of the abilities and equipment they have. Or do what I do and don't. I always have difficulty with this part and prefer to let it crop up organically as the game goes on. because if the GM clearly needs a thing to happen, but your character wouldn't do that, it creates an impasse where either you or the GM needs to adapt to the scenario to keep things moving. And I found that not many GMs are willing to adapt, but I digress. If you only take away a few things from this video, let it be these. Shadowrun 4th Edition is a hefty 375 some odd page long tome. You will need to be familiar with most of it as a player or the GM, or at the very least, you'll need to be comfortable flipping back and forth a lot. Familiarize yourself with the index, or keep in mind that page 86 has a list of where various important sections start. Dice rolls are typically an attribute and a skill, and maybe some other modifier, and you roll that many dice. Look for 5s and 6s, and if half of them are 1. That sort of dice roll is the backbone of Shadowrun. Character creation is extremely open-ended. Everything is paid for from a pool of points. Ergo, why I needed to info dump so many things at the start and set so many guidelines. This can be challenging if you are more accustomed to class and level-based games like Dungeons & Dragons, since they have some guardrails built in to prevent you from making stupid decisions. Not all games are going to be so kind as to leave you effective no matter what you do, but in removing those rails, you do gain a lot of freedom, and thus, it requires a bit less gishing if you're hoping to make a character from a particular TV show or the like. Also, when in doubt for if you're making a character right or what certain things should be from the start, check the pre-made characters. And finally, this is all just the surface of what Shadowrun 4th Edition is about. There are, or will be, depending on when you're watching this, more videos I make covering other aspects of the game. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this or found it helpful, give me a thumbs up like. And if you want to know more about Shadowrun or other rules-dense tabletop role-playing games, check out some of my other videos or consider subscribing. With all that said, shoot straight, conserve ammo, and never cut a deal with a dragon.